In The Irishman, Frank Sheeran walks Jimmy Hoffa into a house in Detroit, shoots him twice behind the ear, and drives away. Martin Scorsese spent 3.5 hours and $159 million telling you that story. The FBI watched Sheeran's confession on video. They called it a lie. Sheeran had gas receipts proving he was somewhere else. He had 18 witnesses. He had told his own close associates on FBI wiretap that he was not in Detroit the day Hoffa vanished. One version received 3 Oscar nominations and 26 million Netflix viewers. The other version sat in FBI case files for 30 years. And here is the part that stays with you. The man investigators actually believed killed Jimmy Hoffa was shot dead on a New York street before he could ever be questioned under oath. The version Hollywood gave you is the wrong one, and the real version is darker. The last thing Jimmy Hoffa did before he vanished, he called his wife Josephine from a payphone. 2:15 in the afternoon, July 30th, 1975. Standing in a parking lot outside a Detroit restaurant, pacing next to his car, he told her he had been stood up. Nobody had shown up for the meeting. He was coming home by 4 o'clock to grill steaks for dinner. He never came home. His green Pontiac Granville sat unlocked in that same parking lot all night. His wife waited. By 7 the next morning, she called her son and daughter. Their father had not come home. His body has never been found. Not in 50 years. Not one bone. Not one piece of clothing. Nothing. And the movie that 26 million people watched built its entire story around a man who the FBI says was not even in the same city when Hoffa disappeared. The Irishman introduces Hoffa as a powerful union boss who got too comfortable with the mob. That is the surface. Here is what the movie never fully explained. Jimmy Hoffa built the International Brotherhood of Teamsters into the largest union in American history. 2.3 million members at its peak. Truck drivers, warehouse workers, delivery men, Hoffa made them powerful. He negotiated the first national freight agreement in 1964 that standardized wages across the entire country. But Hoffa also built something else, a pension fund that became the mob's private bank. The FBI later called it the most abused pension fund in American history. The Chicago outfit borrowed from it. The Detroit mob borrowed from it. Las Vegas casinos were built with Teamsters' pension money. When the mob needed cash, they called Hoffa. In 1967, Hoffa went to prison, jury tampering and fraud. The moment he went away, the mob lost their ATM. Frank Fitzsimmons took over the union, and he was far easier to control. He let the mob do whatever they wanted with the pension fund. In 1971, Nixon pardoned Hoffa, but with one condition written directly into the pardon. He was banned from union activities until 1980. Hoffa had no intention of waiting. He started building support, calling in favors, threatening to expose what the mob had done with the pension money while he was locked up. He was going to take back the union. And when he did, the pension fund gravy train would be over. Hoffa's own son James said it publicly. Dad was pushing so hard to get back, I was increasingly afraid the mob would do something. He was right to be afraid. July 30th, 1975. Here is what actually happened that day, minute by minute. 1:15 p.m. Hoffa left his home at Lake Orion. Before going to the restaurant, he stopped at the office of his close friend Louis Linteau, who ran a limousine service. Linteau was out to lunch. Hoffa left a message and drove on. 2 p.m., Hoffa arrived at the Match's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township. He was there to meet 2 men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mob enforcer, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a feared New Jersey mob capo and Teamsters official. The supposed purpose was a peace meeting. Hoffa and Provenzano had a personal grudge from their time in prison together. The meeting was framed as reconciliation. Nobody showed up. 2:15 p.m. An annoyed Hoffa walked to a payphone on a post behind the restaurant and called his wife. He complained that Giacalone had not shown up. He told her he would be home by 4 o'clock for dinner. 3:30 p.m. Hoffa called Linto again, still complaining, still waiting. After that call, nothing. No more calls. No witnesses who saw what happened next. Just a parking lot and an unlocked car? Several witnesses had seen Hoffa pacing the parking lot. 2 men even recognized him, stopped, shook his hand. He was clearly visible, clearly waiting, clearly frustrated. The last person to actually see Hoffa alive was a truck driver who saw him getting into a maroon Mercury Marquis that nearly collided with his truck as it pulled out of the lot. That car belonged to Anthony Giacalone's son, Joseph. It had been borrowed that day by Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's own foster son, who claimed he was delivering fish. A DNA test in 2001 confirmed Hoffa's hair was in the back seat of that car. O'Brien has never been charged. He has denied involvement his entire life. Now here is where the Irishman falls apart. Frank Sheeran claimed he shot Jimmy Hoffa inside a house on Beaverland Street in Detroit. Shot him twice behind the right ear. Left the body to be cremated. Scorsese built his final film around this confession. Robert De Niro played Sheeran. Al Pacino played Hoffa. The movie was 3.5 hours long. Here is what the movie did not tell you about Frank Sheeran's story. First, the blood. When investigators found the house Sheeran described and ripped up the floorboards, they found bloodstains. This seemed to confirm the confession. The FBI tested those samples against Hoffa's DNA. It was not Hoffa's blood. Second, the timeline. Sheeran claimed he and Chucky O'Brien picked up Hoffa at 2:45 p.m. from the parking lot. But Hoffa's documented phone call to Linto happened at 3:30 p.m., 45 minutes after Sheeran says Hoffa was already in the car. The times do not match. Third, and this is the one that matters most. In 1978, 3 years after Hoffa vanished, the FBI had a wiretap running inside a restaurant in Philadelphia. Frank Sheeran sat down with close associates. The name Jimmy came up. Sheeran told his own trusted friends, clearly, directly, that he was not in Detroit when Hoffa disappeared. He had gas receipts, he had dinner companions, he had 18 people who could confirm his location. The FBI saw this. They interviewed Sheeran. He handed over his alibi evidence. And for the next 25 years, the FBI quietly dropped Sheeran as a serious suspect. Then, in 1999, Sheeran was 78 years old, sick, dying, and talking to an author named Charles Brandt about a book deal. Suddenly, the story changed. Now he was the killer. Harvard law professor Jack Goldsmith, who spent years studying this case, put it plainly. There is no evidence to support Sheeran's involvement. Every FBI investigator he spoke to agreed. The confession, Goldsmith said, was not credible. So why did Sheeran confess to a murder he did not commit? Because he was dying. Because a book deal was worth more than the truth. And because the actual killer, the man investigators really suspected, was already dead and could not contradict him. The FBI's own secret memo, the Hoffex memo, written 6 months after Hoffa vanished and classified for 30 years, named the real suspects. Not Sheeran. Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Briguglio, Tony Provenzano's most trusted hitman. The FBI believed he was directly involved in pulling Hoffa away from that parking lot. Thomas Andretta and Gabriel Briguglio, Sally's brother, were also named, all connected to Provenzano, all suspected of physically carrying out the murder to stop Hoffa from returning to power and cutting off mob access to the pension fund. The Irishman actually shows Sally Bugs in the film, preparing the safe house for the murder. But the movie keeps him in the background, a supporting character. The real story suggests he may have been the central one. Here is where the story turns truly dark. In 1978, 3 years after Hoffa's disappearance, Sally Bugs Briguglio was scheduled to testify in an unrelated murder trial. Before he could take the stand, he was shot dead on a street in New York's Little Italy. No witnesses came forward. No one was ever charged. The man the FBI believed knew exactly what happened to Jimmy Hoffa was silenced before he could say a single word under oath. The FBI agent who led the Hoffa investigation later told a journalist, "I'm comfortable I know who did it, but it's never going to be prosecuted." Jimmy Hoffa has been missing for almost 50 years. His body has never been found. Not under Giant Stadium. They demolished it in 2010 and found nothing. Not at the horse farm in Milford. Not under the garage in Roseville. Not in the Florida Everglades. Nowhere. 14 different people have confessed to killing him. The FBI says most of them are lying. The man Scorsese chose as the killer had an alibi on FBI tape and changed his story 25 years later for a book deal. The man investigators actually suspected was shot dead before he could testify, and the FBI agent who ran the case for years said clearly, he knows what happened. He just cannot prove it in court. The Irishman is a masterpiece of filmmaking. Scorsese himself said, "We are not saying we are telling the actual story. We are telling our story." But 26 million people watched it as if it were the truth. The real story of what happened in that parking lot on July 30th, 1975, the phone call home, the unlocked car, the foster son who borrowed the car that day, the hitman killed before he could talk. That story has never had a 3.5-hour movie made about it. Maybe it should. If you want the cases where the FBI files actually tell a different story than Hollywood, subscribe. I go through federal records, court transcripts, and declassified memos every week to find what the movies leave out.